Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has for the first time outlined key elements of a 20-point draft framework described as a basic document for ending the war. The draft, still not agreed by any side, is being discussed between the US, Europe, Ukraine and Russia. Kyiv is now waiting for Moscow's reaction. The framework reaffirms Ukraine's sovereignty and proposes a non-aggression deal with monitoring and security guarantees linked to NATO's Article 5. Ukraine would keep a large army and receive long-term security guarantees. But the document also contains major concessions. Territorial issues are left open, with options that would freeze current front lines in parts of eastern and southern Ukraine or introduce special economic arrangements in Donbas. It also includes sensitive proposals on joint management of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, early elections in Ukraine after signing, and broad economic arrangements involving the US and Europe. Zelensky stressed that document is only a draft and the territory can be discussed only at leader level, warning that many points remain unacceptable for Ukraine. Overall, the framework shows how current talks rely heavily on compromise, much of it expected from Ukraine, while Russia's obligations remain largely political. Two conditions for deterring Russia, they were outlined by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. According to him, the first and most important condition is a strong Ukraine. Rutte said Ukraine's strength is what prevents the Kremlin from daring to attack NATO countries. The second condition is rapid rearmament of Europe and full implementation of NATO defense spending commitments agreed at the Alliances Summit in The Hague. Rutte warned that if these two conditions are met, NATO will be strong enough and dictator Putin will never dare to launch an attack. He stressed that time is critical. Intelligence assessments suggest that if Europe delays, the security situation could become dangerous as early as 2027. Talks aimed at ending Russia's war against Ukraine have moved forward again. Ukraine's negotiating team has returned from the United States with proposals that Kyiv says have been strengthened. The update was confirmed by Ukrainian President, commenting on recent meetings between Ukrainian officials and US intermediaries linked to President Donald Trump. Zelensky said Defense Minister Rustem Umerov and Deputy Head of the Presidential Office Andriy Ignatov delivered a detailed briefing after their return from Washington. According to him, the talks focused on working draft agreements that already exist and that the one that I've told you, as well as on positions Ukraine has managed to strengthen. Kyiv remains in constant contact with Washington and expects further cooperation. Efforts to reach a peace deal have continued for months, but remain complicated by fundamentally different demands from Ukraine and Russia. The United States is pushing for progress while stressing the need for realistic and enforceable solutions. Ukrainian officials say Kyiv is not blocking peace and is fully engaged in diplomacy. The key question, they add, is whether Russia is genuinely prepared to end the war.
We sense that America wants to reach a final agreement, and from our side, there is full cooperation. Ukraine has never been, and will never be, an obstacle to peace. We are doing everything necessary to ensure these documents become real. The key is that Russia must not sabotage this diplomacy, and must take ending the war 100% seriously.
World media and politicians are already analyzing what 2026 could look like for Ukraine, for the front line, and for the global geopolitical arena. And while such forecasts do not always come true, many analysts agree on one thing: forecasting helps sober minds. The question of how far Putin is prepared to go has once again been examined by analysts at the Atlantic Council. Their answer is unsettling, though it will hardly surprise Ukrainians. Putin has not abandoned his imperial ambitions and has no intention of stopping. And this is not only about Ukraine. If one looks at the border of the Russian Empire at the height of its power, potential Kremlin targets today could include the Baltic states, Poland, Finland, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and countries of Central Asia. Analysts stress this is not fantasy, but a logic Putin himself has repeatedly articulated. In mid-December, speaking before Russia's Ministry of Defense, Putin said that the maximum objectives of the war against Ukraine would be achieved unconditionally. Once again, he framed the war as a historic mission, an attempt to halt what he portrays as Russia's post-Soviet decline. The most direct interpretation of these remarks concerns Donbas. This territory is now at the center of negotiations, with the Kremlin effectively presenting it as the price for a ceasefire. Illusions still exist in the West, but far fewer than before. US intelligence has recently stated that Putin has not abandoned the goal of seizing all of Ukraine and continues to show interest in parts of Europe once under Soviet control. Some take comfort in Russia's battlefield failures in Ukraine, but analysts warn this thinking is dangerous. Russia's slow progress does not reflect weakness. It reflects the strength of Ukrainian resistance and the price Ukraine is paying. The current geopolitical moment favors the Kremlin. Donald Trump's return to the White House has already changed the tone of the US policy on the war and on European security. Washington is increasingly questioning whether the United States would automatically defend NATO allies if Russia launched another attack. The Atlantic Council concludes that Putin has crossed the point of no return. He will not be stopped by partial concessions or eased sanctions. Peace is possible, but only if pressure on the Kremlin becomes so strong that Putin begins to fear defeat in Ukraine and the loss of power at home. Everything else for the dictator is a sign of weakness. Meanwhile, the United States is moving elite forces closer to Venezuela. Washington has significantly increased its military presence in the Caribbean region. According to the Wall Street Journal, at least 10 tiltrotor aircraft used by U.S. Special Operations Forces have been deployed from Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico to the region. These aircraft are designed for complex and high-risk missions. In addition, heavy C-17 transport planes have arrived in Puerto Rico. U.S. officials say the aircraft were carrying military personnel and equipment, though no details were provided about what exactly was transported. It is known that some of the most combat-ready U.S. military units are stationed at these bases. They specialize in high-risk operations, including covert insertion and evacuation of personnel, air support, and rapid combat missions. The redeployment comes amid increased pressure from the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump on Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Washington has already ordered the blocking of oil tankers entering the leaving Venezuelan ports. In late November, Trump announced the closure of the skies over Venezuela and its surrounding airspace. This followed a series of U.S. strikes on vessels of the Venezuelan coast, which Washington says were linked to drug trafficking. At the same time, the U.S. president has publicly not ruled out the possibility of a direct military conflict with Venezuela. The Baltic Sea is becoming a new zone of confrontation between NATO and Russia. That is the warning from The Economist. Beneath the sea lies critical infrastructure, gas pipelines, power cables, and communications lines vital to Northern Europe's energy security. Poland is especially exposed, with nearly half of its energy imports passing through the Baltic. On paper, NATO dominates the region. 8 of the 9 Baltic coastal states are NATO members. Yet Russia still has tools to cause disruption through hybrid attacks. Since 2023, at least 11 suspicious incidents have been recorded, including damage of the Baltic Connector pipeline and a power cable linking Finland and Estonia. Some are linked to Russia's Shadow Fleet. The seabed is difficult to monitor, making it an ideal space to covert operations and deniability. NATO is increasing patrols and developing new surveillance systems, but progress will take time. Meanwhile, countries like Denmark and Poland are expanding naval powers to protect critical infrastructure. The Economist's conclusion is clear. The Baltic Sea is vulnerable and the threat is already real. Christmas in Kyiv this year was not about gifts. It's about safety, family, and survival. These children you see on screen right now live through real hell. War, occupation, basements, evacuation, fear. Ukrainian families who took in displaced and orphaned children gathered for a Christmas dinner organized especially for those who lost their homes or parents because of Russia's war. Families came from different regions, united by one decision: to protect their children when everything else collapsed. One of the mothers was 45 years old Nadia Pomagayeva. She spent 6 months under Russian occupation near Kupiansk with her children. When she finally managed to leave, she took 3 abandoned children from a local hospital and evacuated with them. Since 2014, Nadia has adopted several children. She says there is no other people's children, especially in wartime. So these children who had seen shelling, slept in basements, and learned too early what fear feels like. When asked what they want for Christmas, the answer was simple: the war to end. The dinner was organized by the Katerina Osacha Foundation, funded by Ukrainian TV presenter Katerina Osacha. The goal was to give these children one evening of warmth, safety, and family.
I was in Kupiansk in 2022, when my older brother, who was in Kharkiv, informed us. He called my mother and said that Kharkiv was under attack. They started bombing. We started lowering food into the basement. There was one fear for me when I went outside and saw that a tank barrel was aimed at me, and it scared me a lot. I ran to the house and said that there was a tank in our yard.
Pope Leo XIV has said he is deeply disappointed that Russia continues its attacks on Ukraine even during religious holidays. The pontiff expressed sorrow over Russia's apparent refusal to observe a Christmas ceasefire. The Pope said Russia's unwillingness to pause the fighting on Christmas Day was among the things that caused him to greatest sadness. He stressed that the war does not stop even on days that hold deep religious meaning for millions of people around the world. The pontiff said he hopes the world will listen to this appeal and allow peace to prevail. Even briefly, Pope Leo XIV also confirmed he hopes to visit Ukraine while acknowledging that such a trip remains difficult to arrange at this time.
One of the things that is causing the greatest sadness to me in these days is that apparently Russia rejected the request of a Christmas truce. Once again, I urge all the good-willing people to respect, at least during the festivity of the birth of the Savior, one day of peace. I hope they will listen to us, and that there might be a day, 24 hours of peace worldwide.
That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.